In the beginning there was oil, a dark, viscous promise buried deep beneath the earth, waiting to fuel the ambitions of men. It wasn't just a resource, it was power, distilled into every drop, capable of igniting engines and empires alike. By the late 19th century, the world was waking up to its potential, and a handful of visionaries saw the chance to bend history to their will. John D. Rockefeller, a man with a preacher's calm and a predator's instinct, stood at the forefront, his Standard Oil Company swallowing competitors like a slow, relentless tide. Rockefeller didn't just sell oil, he sold control, whispering into the ears of railroad barons and politicians until they danced to his tune. In America, his monopoly crushed dissent, while across the Atlantic, the old world watched with a mix of awe and unease. Then came the 20th century, and with it the rumble of machines that would reshape the globe. Oil wasn't just a commodity anymore. It was the lifeblood of war, industry, and progress, a prize worth fighting for. In 1911, the US government struck back, shattering Standard Oil into pieces under antitrust laws. But those pieces didn't die. They multiplied, slithering into new forms like Exxon, Chevron, and Mobil, their roots still tangled in Rockefeller's legacy. Across the ocean, the British and French carved up the Middle East, their pens dripping with ink and oil as they drew borders over ancient sands. The Anglo-Persian Oil Company, later BP, clawed its way into Iran, promising wealth but delivering chains. In Tehran, a Shah sat on a throne propped up by foreign hands, while his people simmered under the weight of promises unkept. Oil flowed west, and power flowed with it, leaving the East to choke on dust and resentment. World War I erupted, and oil proved its worth in blood and steel. Tanks rolled, planes soared, and ships cut through the seas, all guzzling the black gold that now dictated victory or defeat. The Allies won, but the oil barons won more, their influence seeping into the Treaty of Versailles like a stain no one could scrub out. Germany, stripped bare, watched as the victors gorged on the spoils of a new petroleum age. By the 1920s, the game had shifted. America's oil fields boomed, but the Middle East loomed larger still. Companies like Shell and Texaco joined the fray, their executives sipping whiskey in boardrooms while plotting moves on a global chessboard. In Iraq, the British installed a puppet king, his crown glittering with oil concessions that lined London's pockets. The locals called it theft, the colonizers called it business. Then came the Great Depression, a crack in the world's foundation. But oil didn't falter. It adapted, twisting the arms of governments desperate for cash, turning crisis into opportunity. In 1933, a deal was struck in Saudi Arabia that would echo through the decades. Standard Oil of California struck gold, or rather oil, beneath the desert, and a kingdom of sand became a linchpin of Western power. King Ibn Saud shook hands with men in suits, his robes a stark contrast to their ties. But the language of profit spoke louder than culture. The House of Saud grew rich, and America's grip tightened on a region it barely understood. World War II lit the world ablaze, and oil fanned the flames higher. Hitler's tanks stalled without it, Japan's navy sank for want of it, and the Allies raced to secure every well from Baku to Burma. Roosevelt met Ibn Saud on a warship in 1945, a handshake sealing a pact. Oil for protection, a devil's bargain that would haunt the future. The US emerged a superpower, its veins pumping with petroleum and ambition. Post-war, the oil giants grew bolder, their tendrils wrapping around new nations like Indonesia and Nigeria. Colonialism faded, but the companies stayed, rewriting the rules of sovereignty with every barrel shipped. In Iran, the people had enough. Prime Minister Mossadegh rose in 1951, vowing to take back what was theirs. He nationalized the oil, and the West trembled, their profits slipping through their fingers. The CIA and MI6 didn't hesitate. They engineered a coup, toppling Mossadegh in 1953 and reinstalling the Shah. Oil flowed again, and democracy drowned beneath it, a lesson etched in Tehran's streets. Meanwhile, OPEC was born in 1960, a coalition of oil-rich nations tired of being pawns. Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, and others banded together, their fists raised against the West's insatiable hunger. But the oil companies were cunning. They played the members against each other, sowing discord with bribes and backroom deals. Unity cracked, and the cartel's power wavered, though its shadow still loomed. The 1973 oil crisis hit like a thunderclap. OPEC flexed its muscles, embargoing oil to punish the West for supporting Israel. Gas lines stretched across America, prices soared, and the world realized who truly held the reins. Panic gripped Washington, but the oil giants smiled. They thrived in chaos, their profits ballooning as nations begged for scraps. The crisis passed, but the lesson lingered. Oil could choke a superpower without firing a shot. In the 1980s, the Cold War turned oil into a weapon once more. The US and Soviet Union vied for control, propping up dictators from Angola to Afghanistan, anywhere the ground bled black. Reagan struck a deal with Saudi Arabia, flood the market, crash the prices, and bankrupt the Soviets. It worked. Moscow crumbled, but the Middle East paid the price in instability. The Gulf War in 1991 was oil's next chapter. Saddam Hussein torched Kuwait's wells, a fiery middle finger to the West. American boots hit the sand, not for freedom, but for the pumps that fueled their way of life. Black smoke billowed as the world watched, a reminder that oil wasn't just power, it was war painted in flames. The US won, but the seeds of resentment sprouted faster than they could be stamped out. The 21st century dawned, and the game grew darker still. Climate change loomed, but the oil industry didn't blink. They funded doubt, spinning webs of misinformation to keep the world hooked. In Washington, lobbyists swarmed like locusts, their briefcases stuffed with cash and promises. Politicians bent, laws softened, and the planet warmed while profits soared. Iraq fell in 2003, and the whispers grew louder. Was it for weapons or for wells? The oil flowed, Halliburton cashed in, and Baghdad burned, a city sacrificed on the altar of greed. In Russia, Putin rose, his empire built on gas and crude, a new czar wielding pipelines like swords. The West sanctioned him, but Europe shivered without his fuel, caught in a trap decades in the making. Venezuela, once an oil titan, collapsed under mismanagement and sanctions, its people starving while the black gold sat untapped. The industry watched, unmoved, its eyes already on the next prize. The Arctic beckoned, its ice melting to reveal untapped reserves, a final frontier for a dying age. ExxonMobil and Rosneft raced north, their drills piercing a world on the brink. And then there was shale, America's trump card, fracking its way to independence. The Middle East faltered, but the oil giants adapted, their profits unshaken by the shifting sands. Today, the world teeters. Renewables rise, but oil clings tight, its roots too deep to pull. Electric cars hum, yet jets still guzzle, and factories churn, all tethered to the legacy of Rockefeller's dream. The industry's shadow stretches across a century, a tale of brilliance and betrayal. It lifted nations, toppled kings, and warmed the earth, a force as unstoppable as it was unrepentant. Every barrel tells a story, of deals in darkened rooms, of wars fought in silence, of a planet bartered for power. The oil industry didn't just manipulate global politics, it wrote its script, line by bloody line. And so it stands, a colossus astride history, its reign waning but not yet done. The question remains, who will wrest the pen from its grasp, and what will they write next?